Highport announced itself by smell before it ever came into view, beginning with salt carried inland by a tired wind, followed by tar, and then by something older and less honest, waste that had learned to coexist with water instead of being carried away by it. Cities like this do not bother pretending to be clean. They only pretend to be necessary. We approached along the road as travelers do, unremarkable and slightly out of place, and the walls rose ahead of us, tall enough to discourage casual trouble, but not tall enough to promise safety. They had been repaired often and badly, with patches of stone that did not quite match the rest, as if the city were constantly correcting mistakes it refused to acknowledge. At the gate, the guards watched us with practiced disinterest, and that was the first sign. Cities on edge tend to stare too hard, while cities at peace look away entirely. But cities like Highport learn to watch without seeing. The guards glanced at our weapons, our packs, and our faces, asking no questions that required answers, only those that demanded compliance, names, purpose, duration, and we gave them what they needed, and nothing more. Once inside the gate, the city narrowed quickly, its streets twisting in ways that made sense only to those who had grown up navigating them, while buildings leaned toward one another like conspirators, their upper floors blotting out much of the sky. Sound carried strangely here, with footsteps echoing when they should not have, and voices fading when they should have lingered, and somewhere beneath it all water moved under stone, unseen and constant. We did not head straight for the ruined temple, because that would have been foolish. Instead, we walked. We passed markets where goods were displayed too neatly, as if no one expected them to remain for long, and taverns that smelled of old ale and newer desperation, as well as shrines where offerings lay untouched in the open, not out of reverence, but because no one wished to be seen taking them. I began to notice which streets were clean, not spotless, but maintained, and I understood that those streets belonged to someone, just as I noticed which streets were ignored entirely and realized those belonged to everyone else. Highport did not feel hostile, and that was the problem. Hostile cities push back and resist intrusion, while Highport absorbed us quietly, the way water absorbs dye, caring little that we were there so long as we did not disturb the patterns it relied upon. That is how slavers prefer it. The ruined temple stood near the edge of the city, close enough to the water to be useful and far enough from the center to be ignored. Its facade collapsed long ago with stones scattered as though the building itself had chosen to lie down and wait. No guards stood openly nearby, which was another sign. When something valuable is truly hidden, it is often left unguarded in plain sight, because guards attract questions, while ruin invites none. We circled the area once, slowly, as the fighter counted sight lines. The cleric watched the sky as if expecting judgment to fall from it, and the mage studied the stonework, noting which parts were old and which had been disturbed more recently. I watched the doorways instead, seeing people go in and come out, none of them looking like priests or worshippers, but all of them looking like workers, which told me more than I needed to know. We waited until evening. Cities change after dark, though not always in the ways people expect. And in Highport, the night did not bring chaos so much as permission, allowing people to move more freely, speak more quietly, and do things they would not do in daylight. We approached the temple as if we belonged there, because often that is enough. The entrance was partially collapsed but not impassable, with stone cleared deliberately just enough to allow passage without drawing attention, and once inside the air changed immediately, growing cooler and heavier and layered with the scent of damp stone and old incense that had no right to linger after so many years. I paused just inside the threshold, because thresholds matter. They mark the point where intention becomes action, and where turning back begins to feel like retreat rather than choice. And so I listened. Somewhere below us, stone creaked, water dripped steadily and without hurry, and voices carried faintly, muffled by distance and walls. The fighter shifted his weight behind me, and I raised a hand, not to stop him, but to remind him that silence was already doing the work for us. Inside, the temple was not as ruined as it had appeared from the outside, with reinforced walls, cleared floors, and makeshift supports holding up ceilings that should have fallen years ago. All of it evidence that someone had invested time here, along with effort and planning. Altars had been repurposed as tables, and symbols scratched into the stone had been defaced not out of hatred, but out of inconvenience, because faith had simply been something that had been in the way. I moved ahead slowly, testing each step and each shadow, my hands knowing the shape of my tools without looking, and the lock on the first interior door was crude, recently installed and poorly maintained, which I found comforting. Poor maintenance suggests confidence, confidence suggests routine, and routine creates blind spots. Beyond the door, the temple descended, with stairs worn unevenly by centuries of feet, leading down into spaces the original builders had never intended to be seen often. As the air grew damp, sounds echoed longer than they should have, and the walls closed in, subtly at first and then unmistakably. This was no longer a place of worship. This was infrastructure. I began to notice the signs of it then. Scuff marks where heavy loads had been dragged, ropes worn thin from repeated use, and marks on walls where people had been guided, pushed, or restrained. And though the cleric noticed as well, he did not speak, though his breathing changed slightly, a detail I heard and filed away. Below us, the city continued to live its life, while above us people ate, drank, argued, and slept, and between those two truths the slavers worked. That is how cities learn to look away, not all at once, but piece by piece, until the effort of seeing becomes greater than the cost of ignorance. We reached a junction where the temple gave way to something older and less intentional, as the stonework changed and the floor sloped gently downward, slick with moisture. The sewers. I have never liked sewers because they carry everything a city does not want to remember. Waste, secrets, and consequences, and Highports were no different. The sound of water was constant now, louder and closer, with channels running along the sides of the passages and their contents moving steadily toward somewhere no one cared to imagine, while the air grew thick and layered with rot, chemicals, and something else, something organic and alive. I stopped again, not because of sound, but because of absence. There were no rats. That worried me because rats avoid danger only when something worse has claimed their space. I signaled the others to hold, and in that moment, standing beneath the city that had decided not to see, I understood something I had suspected since the lords first spoke to us. This place was not merely hiding slavers, it was supporting them. Cities do not become complicit by accident, but through a long series of small, reasonable decisions that make sense in isolation and feel necessary at the time, and Highport had already made those decisions. Now, quietly and methodically, we were walking into the spaces those decisions had created. I took one more step forward, listening to the way sound changed around my boots and the way the darkness seemed to wait, because whatever lay ahead was organized, and more than anything else, that told me how dangerous it would be.